It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you in my capacity as president of St. Ambrose University to this beautiful Christ the King Chapel for our 2010 Pacem in Terris Awards ceremony. Thank you, Chuck, for the beautiful prelude ahead of time, setting the tone for our afternoon. It has been an honor for St. Ambrose University to host this ceremony. We're particularly grateful to be able to partner with all the members of the Pacem in Terris Coalition, which are listed in the back of your program. And we are especially pleased to honor Father John Deere for his peacemaking efforts in the United States and indeed around the world. Welcome, Father Deere, to our chapel and to this wonderful ceremony. As a Catholic university, St. Ambrose upholds a long tradition of education for social justice and for service in the pursuit of peace. So in keeping with that rich tradition, we are delighted to have all of you join us today to be inspired by Father Deere's commitment to justice and peace, and to be renewed in hope for the work that lies ahead for all of us. And now, I'd like to introduce Reverend Quay to offer our invocation.
Thank you, Sister Joan, for the introduction. It is a pleasure to be here, and a pleasure to represent the ecumenical community in the Quad Cities in this event and in the planning for it. Will you join me in an opening prayer? Dear God, we gather in this worship space this afternoon to remember and to celebrate the call for peace and justice in this world that you have sent through your Son, as well as the many prophets who have come with your message. As we gather in safety and comfort, may we remember that so many of our brothers and sisters in this creation find neither in their lives. We hear about disease brought on to a large degree because of poverty. We hear about war and hatred between people when you have for generation upon generations called us to beat our swords into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks. You have implored that we hear that war and injustice has no place in this world. Today we gather to remember one of your prophets who has challenged us to truly meet the messenger of peace, who has reminded us that following you does put us on a different track from much of this world. Can we hear the words of Jesus to those gathered in Nazareth so many centuries back? He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. May these words ring out as we celebrate and worship the message of love and justice. Amen. It is now my pleasure to introduce a man who probably in this setting needs absolutely no introduction. I speak of Monsignor Marv Martet. Father Martet.
I'm usually asked to give the history because I'm the oldest one around here. No one else can remember what was happening in those days. In fact, I was at a meeting at the University of Notre Dame last week about the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, which is under attack these days. And I was the oldest priest there, so I told them all the history. We're meeting in this beautiful building. Someone gave millions of dollars to build this building on peace and justice, and they just got everything there. And they were bragging about how their students are out working, you know, in the community and service learning and all that stuff. And I said, well, we were doing that in little St. Ambrose College out in Davenport 50 years ago. I'm glad to see Notre Dame is catching up with St. Ambrose. So I told that to Sister Joan. And I came in. So I'm asked to speak. You can all read the names the names of the people. I'm going to give you some human interest stories behind the scenes that might be interesting. Jack Smith, who's one of the authors of this, has died. He died in 85 or 6. Charles Toney died a couple years ago at age 96. He was just inducted into the Iowa Hall of Fame for African Americans. Bill Cribbs is still alive, but he and with Cy Roberts were inducted into the Hall of Fame at the Central High School for their athletic abilities. Pacem Terris was issued in 1963, Peace on Earth, by Pope John XXIII. It was during a break during the Second Vatican Council. It's the first papal encyclical addressed to all people of goodwill. I remember I ran into Larry Mullins, who was chancellor then. He said, "Oh, you've got to read this encyclical. It's really great." Well, I hadn't seen it yet. And then later that week, at the board meeting of the Catholic Interracial Council, Father Jack Smith, who used to teach history here for many years, he died in 86, I think. He said, we got to develop an award based on this. So in '64, we gave it to John F. Kennedy posthumously. He was the first president ever to call racism a moral problem. And John Howard Griffin, the same year, author of Black Like Me, became a great friend of the civil rights people here, stopped here a lot. His first stop was St. Ambrose. In 1965 is Martin Luther King. We had been present with him to march with him in Washington in August of '63. Heard his I Have a Dream speech. We were right up front. I called Matt Almond, who was the national office of the Catholic Interracial Council in Chicago. I said, "Do you think we can get King out here?" He said, "Oh yeah, he owes me a favor." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, I'm the one who delivered all the nuns and priests down to Selma to march with him." So he called him, and we got him. Then at midnight, the night before the award, 1967 had the biggest flood in the world in history that year. And the call came at midnight, and they said, "We just saw the news, we think we shouldn't come." And I said, "Listen, we took your word was going on in Selma, you take our word was going on here, there's no problem." So he came. And then at the award, he said, "You know, tell we're making some progress when a Catholic group gives an award to a Baptist minister named Martin Luther, and it takes place in a Masonic temple." And that night, we gave an award to William Hewitt, President Deere and Company, for the great progress Deere had made on hiring people of color. And King said, at the dinner, he said, "You know, I'd like to get back to Chicago tonight." And Mr. Hewitt said, "Well, I'm flying to Washington. We'll just drop you off in the company plane." So they went back to Chicago on the Deere plane. I would love to have been in that conversation. So until 1978, this was all Catholic Interracial Council, the award. We informed the bishop and invited him, but that's about as far as it went. I know we made him very nervous a number of times. It was our business to do that. Being a prophet is not comfortable or safe. And we were very ecumenical in those days. Even though we were a Catholic organization, our vice president was Fred Epstein, a Jewish owner of KSTT, remember KSTT, radio station, and he and his wife had a radio program, Fred and Ruth show, and they talked a lot about civil rights, had speakers come in. I'll never forget Senator Harold Hughes came, and that booming voice, he said, "I know the Ten Commandments well, I've broken every one of them." And on the way out, Kathy Kirschbaum said, "Oh, that's a great program." I said, "I don't know if we'll ever do it again, it's just too much work." "Oh," she said, "you can't stop it now, it's too important for the community." And I think that's true, so I passed that on to the committee. It is important for the community. It's a great prophetic message and a way to educate the community. It also took us 20 years to get Daniel Berrigan and Cesar Chavez. I have two stories. One of my former students arrested Dan Berrigan, Jim Anderson. And I found out because I was coming from the hospital, and Jim's dad was a doctor, and he said, called me over and he said, "You know, Jim arrested the Berrigans." And so Jim was here for our 50th anniversary last week from Assumption High School. And I'm impressed with that class. And he said, I was brand new in the FBI, I didn't know what I was doing. They just called me and said, go out and arrest these people. He said, I had a good record the first day. I brought in 9 the first day. And but he said he cleared his record by later on putting Spiro Agnew away. And I said, what's that story? He said, well, we found by accident. We were investigating something else, some other corruption in Baltimore. He said, this contractor said, well, I've been paying off Spiro Agnew for years. I'm still sending checks to the White House. And I get a note if I miss one. So he went to the Attorney General and he said, I can't have both the President and Vice President under indictment at the same time. I said, we will not contest this. So, and the other, Cesar Chavez. Cesar Chavez was here in 1969 for a rally, great boycott rally downtown. At the end, I told him, well, I'm leaving tomorrow for Houston for cancer surgery. And he said to his aide, write that down. On Thanksgiving Day, he walked in my hospital room in Houston with 3 or 4 farm workers. Well, that's loyalty. In 1977, we put the Cavalry Racial Council to sleep, to bed. After 20 years, we figure, to know when to start something and also when to end it. We thought we'd done our part. 2 reasons were the rising of the Black Power movement and also Martin Luther King going into the anti-war movement. In 1978, I was called to Washington, D.C. Tom Mastian took over, and he continued the award, but he broadened it, the sponsorship. So we brought in St. Ambrose and Augustana, Churches United, and the group has enlarged since then. I think it was a very good move, and also to involve the diocese much more formally than we did before. So I got to D.C. We wanted Sarge Shriver, who was one of the recipients, to give a talk at one of our meetings. So I called him up and said, who I was, and that didn't mean anything. But I said, I was a Shriver delegate when you were running for president. Oh, he said, there are not many of you alive. I got to meet you. So I got invited over to their home for dinner. Of course, he was married to John F. Kennedy's sister. All the pictures above the piano and everything were the Kennedy family, all the political things. And the first thing Eunice said to me was, from Iowa, you didn't support Teddy. I said, we support Bob and Jack. That should be good enough. They're a very political family. In fact, we were trying to get Robert Kennedy, and they said, well, he's in Africa. We'll send you Sarge Shriver. So that was wonderful because of his work. Then when Lech Walesa came, President of Solidarity and President of Poland, I'm told that the minute he got out of the airport, he was given orders. Now, no press conferences, none of this, none of that. And then we had to be program settled, planned over in Rock Island at the Union Hall, because he was union leader. And we were going to introduce him and all this stuff, He just walked in the door and ran up and took over the microphone and took over the whole thing. I said, I know why that guy beat communism. And then Governor Vilsack showed up at that. He was just out there standing in the hall, and he said, how do you get all these people to come here? I said, it's usually through friends, contacts. And they do call each other, because when George Keenan was nominated, he called Sarge Shriver and said, who are these people out there? And Sarge Shriver said, oh, they're good people. So he accepted the award. So we've had 6 Nobel winners. 2 are candidates for canonization, Mother Teresa and Dorothy Day. Make it 3, John the 23rd. So to the committee, I say, keep up your good work.
John F. Kennedy. John Howard Griffin. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Philip Randolph. Reverend James Robbie. Saul Alinsky. Dorothy Day. Harold Hughes. Dom Elder Camara. Blessed Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Bishop Thomas Gumbleton. Bristol Lee Sutton. Bishop Ernest Unterfeldler. George Kennan. Helen N. Caldecott. Cardinal Joseph Bernadine. Bishop Morris Dingman. Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Eileen Egan. Myri Corrigan McGuire. Maria Julia Hernandez. Cesar Chavez. Daniel Berrigan. Jim Wallace. Bishop Samuel Ruiz. Jim and Shelley Douglas. Sister Helen Regine. Adolfo Perez Esquivel. Monsignor George Higgins. Vaish Walesa. Dorothy Marie and Gwen Hennessy. Arthur Simon. Don Mosley. Bishop Salim Gazor. Monsignor Marvin Bonner. Hildegard Goss Meyer.
Good afternoon. First of all, I should let myself know that I just introduced myself to John Deere for the first time today, so that's what that was about. My name is Michael Gaiman, and I get to share a few words about the history of John Deere and some of the things that he's accomplished. John Deere is a Jesuit priest, a peace activist, and the author of more than 20 books. Most recently, A Persistent Peace, Put Down Your Sword, Transfiguration, and The Questions of Jesus and Mohandas Gandhi, All of these books are for sale out here in the welcoming gathering space. John has served as director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. After September 11th and the attacks on the World Trade Center, Father John began volunteering as a Red Cross chaplain and became one of the coordinators for the chaplaincy program. He worked with some 1,500 family members who lost loved ones that day, as well as hundreds of firefighters, police officers, all at the same time speaking out against the U.S. bombing of Afghanistan. From 2002 to 2004, he served as pastor of 4 churches in New Mexico. Father John has traveled the war zones of the world in his work for peace and nonviolence. His work has taken him to El Salvador, where he lived and worked in a refugee camp in 1985, to Guatemala, Nicaragua, Haiti, and the Middle East, to Northern Ireland, where he worked and lived in a human rights center for over a year, and into Iraq, where he led a delegation of Nobel Peace Prize winners to witness the effects of the U.S. sanctions on Iraqi children. John has he's been arrested 70 times for civil disobedience, spent over a year and a half in jail for his work for nonviolence and peace. He has organized hundreds of demonstrations against war and nuclear weapons at military bases all across the country. Father John has also given lectures and retreats. He has worked with Mother Teresa and others to abolish the death penalty. Currently, John lives in New Mexico, and in 2008 was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. In his letter of recommendation, Tutu wrote, "Father John is a man who has the courage of his convictions. He speaks out and acts against war and the manufacture of weapons in any situation where a human might be at risk through violence." John is very well known in the Catholic social justice community for his important writings and teaching on following the nonviolent Jesus. He's also known for his challenge to each and every one of us who identify as a Christian. A native of North Carolina, John was arrested December 7th of 1993 at the Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. John was hammering on an F-15 nuclear fighter bomber in an effort to beat swords into plowshares, according to the biblical vision of the prophet Isaiah, along with activist Philip Berrigan. He spent 8 months in North Carolina jails. Father John may not build or design farming equipment in the traditional manner. He has taken very seriously the prophet Isaiah's call to beat swords into plowshares, always with love of God and love of neighbor in mind. I now invite Bishop Amos and Father John Deere for the presentation of the Pacem and Terris Award.
The 2010 Pacem and Terris Peace and Freedom Award is awarded to Reverend John Deere, S.J., presented by Bishop Martin Amos of the Diocese of Davenport and the Pacem and Terris Coalition of the Quad Cities, in light of your passionate commitment to peace and justice. Through your peacemaking efforts and for teaching nonviolence, you have provided countless people the challenge of bringing peace into their own lives and in turn to our world. You embody the words of Pope John XXIII in his encyclical Pacem in Terris as a spark of light, a center of love, a vivifying leaven to your sisters and brothers around the world. given on this 31st day of October, 2010, in Davenport, Iowa, USA.
Well, thank you so very much. I'm just overwhelmed. Thank you, Bishop, for the award, and I just don't even know where to begin. I'm so moved and grateful and encouraged and honored, and I certainly don't fit into this company. I feel like a novice peacemaker, but I thank you. And I thank the committee. I thank Sister Joan, St. Ambrose. Thank you for welcoming me here, and other friends I see. I don't know how to thank you all enough. I thank you for all that you do for peace and justice. But to give you a clue about how I feel, if you look at this picture, I mean, I remember this one on the bottom. I'm getting arrested there in 1990. There were about 100 Jesuits and sisters and all. We're getting arrested at the Concord Naval Weapons Base in the Bay Area. And being an activist, we were up all night. The sign I've made about 4 in the morning says no to nuclear weapons, but nuclear is spelt wrong. That's why. That's Daniel Berrigan up there. And I talked to Dan on Friday and bring greetings from Daniel Berrigan to everybody. And he'll be 90 years old in the spring and is just as strong as ever and a true saint. And so this is so thrilling. For me, you know, I met and befriended so many of these great people because I, like you, just wanted to learn from these great masters. I think it's so exciting what the diocese and the Quad Cities, the committee has done all these years with this award, and that you've kept it alive, that you named it after John the 23rd. The vision, the greatest statement that ever came out of Rome in 2,000 years, Pacem and Terris. It's what we're all about. Just fantastic. But I am so nervous, and I'm reminded of the young priest who's giving his first homily, and he's really nervous. And it's a true story. He comes to the podium, and he taps on the microphone, and he says, "Something's wrong with this microphone." And the congregation goes, "And also with you." But I hope, that's my best joke. I'm just downhill from there. And I always say, you know, please call me John, because my name is so goofy. Father Dear just doesn't really work. You know, it's like a cosmic joke. But really, I'm just so happy to be here and grateful for the encouragement to go forward. And I thank you, and I accept it with all of you to continue to live out the Pacem and Terris vision. And maybe, you know, Kent, thank you too for hosting me in the office. Kent said I could speak for a little bit. Oh, and Monsignor, thank you so much too for welcoming me and for your great example in your life. It's an honor to be here with you. But Kent said I could say a few words. In a nutshell, for me, you know, life is the Pacem and Terris journey. I come to the conclusion that's the meaning of life. The spiritual life, the journey of peace, to live in peace. Dare we make peace with ourselves, to go deep into the mystical depths of peace within. Wow. To really make peace with your spouse, your children, your parents, your neighbors, everyone in the church. I always say it's going to be rough. That was a joke. No. Everyone in Iowa, everyone in the country, to see life as a journey walking on the road to peace, in peace with every human being on the planet and all of creation and all creatures, toward a new future of peace and the God of peace. It's so beautiful. It's a wonderful way to live life. And all of these people are my teachers and heroes because that seems to me the greatest thing we can do with our lives. is to walk that road to peace and to help others to enter that journey. If you will, to move from war to peace, from violence to nonviolence. And I've always remembered what our hero, Dr. King, I've been asking everybody about all these events. Dr. King being here, getting the award. The night before he was killed, he said, the choice is no longer violence or nonviolence, it's nonviolence or non-existence. I think those are the greatest words ever said in the last century by this great prophet sent by God to us. And that sums up the predicament we're all in. To move toward nonviolence and become people of nonviolence. And so I've just been talking about this forever. What does that mean? How do we become people of nonviolence? None of this was my intention, Bishop. You know, I was just a dopey young kid going to enter the Jesuits. My plan was to be a pious Jesuit, which you may think is an oxymoron. But what happened was I thought reading Ignatius and St. Francis and St. Dominic, and they all packed up and they go to the Holy Land to see where Jesus lived before they began their public lives. And I thought, that's a good idea. And so I decided to do the same thing. And I went and told my mother, and she said, oh, where did we go wrong? And 1982, the week I left to camp out for 3 months and walk through Israel, Israel invaded Lebanon. All of it was funded and organized by the Pentagon. And they called it Operation Peace for Galilee. And all the tourist groups were canceled. And I walked through Jerusalem and Nazareth and was camping out at the Sea of Galilee for about 8 days by myself and nobody for miles around. And for the first time in my life, I'm reading the Sermon on the Mount. Can you imagine? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice. Blessed are the peacemakers. You've heard it said, thou shalt not kill. I say, don't even get angry. Be reconciled. Offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. You've heard it said, love your countrymen and hate your enemy. I say to you, love your enemies. And this was so shocking to me. And I'm camping out at the Sea of Galilee going, is this what it means to be a follower of Jesus? And I see all these jets fall from the sky, breaking the sound barrier, setting off all these sonic booms, swooping down over the Sea of Galilee and bomb and kill people in Lebanon. Right as I'm going through this dramatic moment. Changed my life. I thought, wow, this is what we're supposed to do. The reality of the world is sisters and brothers killing sisters and brothers all over the planet in the name of God, even in the name of the nonviolent Jesus, even at the place where he said, love your enemies. I saw this with my own eyes, 1982. And then, like you, got involved as much as I could in the movements for peace and justice, meeting these great people, going to live and work in El Salvador, doing a plowshares action with Philip Berrigan, and learning, sitting at the feet of Daniel Berrigan, my teacher. I remember being in jail. I was sharing with Philip Berrigan, and he sent us a letter. And then the following week, those same clippings we saw there, I've been in Iowa, and they gave me the Pacem and Terris Award. It's very exciting. And all of this now, I'm in New Mexico, and we have a campaign aimed at Los Alamos to close the birthplace of the bomb, where business is booming. And Obama has spent more money on nuclear weapons than far beyond George W. Bush, and is entirely rebuilt Los Alamos and has made it a state-of-the-art bomb factory, more than anybody since Ronald Reagan in 1983. Nobody knows this. And so like you, we do what we can. And I've just come from being on trial last month in Nevada for protesting the drones, which are based at Creech Air Force Base. 14 of us walked onto the base last year, with very simple, signs and a letter asking, please don't make these drones and drop the bombs on children in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Iraq. This isn't going to end terrorism. We're going to breed future terrorists. And we bought roses and pizza. Okay, we're not very sophisticated, but we mean well. And we were arrested and chained and thrown into the Las Vegas city jail. It was an incredible experience. And then brought on trial last month, and I thought for sure we were going to get 6 months in prison, but after a day in court, and we had Ramsey Clark testifying about, the criminal trespassing charge and the duty of a citizen to speak out against the killing of children around the planet, even according to international law and the Nuremberg principles. At the very end of the day, the judge says, well, I'm shocked. There's more going on here than just an ordinary trespassing charge. And he says, I need to go off and think about this. We were shocked to hear, so he says, I'm going to go and think for 4 months. So come back on January 27th, and then I'll give you a verdict. So I'm very happy to be here with you, is what I'm trying to say. I never thought I'd be here. Nonviolence as the path to peace and Pacem and Terris. That's what Martin Luther King said, quoting Gandhi. What does it mean? For me, it means looking out on the whole planet and seeing every human being on the planet, all 6.3 billion of us, your very sister and brother. Go really deep into that spiritual vision of reality. And the truth is, and it's in the bishop's peace pastoral, the gift of peace was given long ago. We're already one. We're already united. We're already reconciled. And as you go deeper into the spiritual vision of reality, that we are one with all humanity and all creatures and all creation, you can never hurt anyone ever again. Much less be silent or passive when there are 30 wars happening today, 25,000 nuclear weapons, 1 billion people are starving to death, 3 billion in poverty, and our hatred of the earth leading to global warming. So there's nothing passive about peace. And nonviolence is not a tactic or a strategy anymore. We have to go way beyond these great figures. It's an entirely new way of life that practices active love for the entire human race, pursuing the truth of our common unity, reconciling with everybody on the planet, resisting every form of violence and injustice, giving our lives in unconditional, non-retaliatory, sacrificial, universal love for every human being, with one catch. There is no cause, however noble, no matter what they say, for which we will ever again support the taking of a single human life. What do you think of that? That's what we're about. The days of killing are over. The time of using death as a social method to bring about change is over. But if Dr. King were here, he would say, "Now, John, here he is. The peacemaking begins with the willingness to give your life, even to be killed in the struggle for justice and peace, even to accept suffering in the struggle for justice without a trace of the desire to retaliate with further violence." And Gandhi says this is a power more powerful than all the weapons of the world combined because it's the way of God. And we're going to go deep into nonviolence within, practice meticulous interpersonal nonviolence, and use it as a methodology of social change that always works, and form a global grassroots movement of nonviolence to transform structures of violence, as he proved in India and Dr. King proved in the civil rights movement. Just fantastic. But what I've been saying in my journey is trying to figure out the spirit with you all, the spirituality of nonviolence. And I hear from all these great peacemakers the really good news, and this is what's so shocking and needed now. War is not the will of God. War is never blessed by God. And I think war is not endorsed by any major religion. War is the definition of the demonic, anything that brings death to other people. And frankly, war just doesn't work. It never leads to peace. It's not only immoral or illegal, it's just downright impractical. It always sows the seeds for further wars. Peaceful means are the only way to a peaceful future in the God of peace. So I've been talking about what does it mean to reflect on the nonviolence of God, and God as a peacemaker. And that led me to the question, was Jesus violent or nonviolent? And so I've been talking about that for the last 30 years of my life, pretty much every day. And I say, I quote Mahatma Gandhi, Jesus was the greatest person of nonviolence in the history of the world. I just love that from the great Hindu. And then Gandhi goes on and says, and the only people on the whole planet who don't know that Jesus is nonviolent are Christians. I think it's a critical question to understand Pacem and Terris and what it means to be a human being in a spiritual life. I think nonviolence is at the heart of every major religion, and maybe the future is interfaith nonviolence. We all have to make the Gandhian Kingian journey to become people of nonviolence, to be disarmed, to allow our hearts to be disarmed and become a disarming presence on the planet. But as Christians, we've lost the nonviolence of Jesus. And that's what I invite all of us to go forth and be, missionaries of the nonviolent Jesus. I submit that all his teachings were a spectacular vision of nonviolence. From, the Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers, they're the sons and daughters of God. To love one another, be as compassionate as God, hunger and thirst for justice, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Take up the cross, lay down your life in love for others. He says the most political words ever uttered in all of history. Love your enemies. That's the measure of our discipleship to Jesus. Spectacular. And I've been studying that for years and trying to figure out, okay, Jesus, maybe, but why? And it's Dr. King who's the only one really explained it to me in one of his sermons. Jesus doesn't say love your enemies because it's the right thing to do, even though it is. This is Dr. King. Jesus doesn't say love your enemies even because it's the moral position to take, even though it is. Jesus doesn't say love your enemies because it's the only practical political solution left for the planet, even though it is. King said, Jesus says love your enemies. Then you will be sons and daughters of the God who lets the sun shine on the good and the bad, and the rain fall on the just and the unjust. Remember that? In this political teaching, Jesus, for I think the only time in the Gospels, explains the nature of the mystery of divinity. God is nonviolent. That's the question. Do we worship a God of peace, a God of universal love? Can we become sons and daughters of a God who makes peace, who practices universal love? Then we're just chips off the old block. It's fantastic. And there's so many problems in the church and the country and the world that we can talk about that. But for those of us who are Christians, and you can apply this in your own text, but this Jesus is so spectacularly nonviolent. He's an explosion of nonviolence in the world. And he has this great ministry, but then he turns and he marches to Jerusalem. He turns over the tables of the money changers, confronts the religious authorities as they work with the empire to oppress all the poor people, and says, no more injustice. He does civil disobedience. He doesn't hit anybody, hurt anybody, kill anybody, or drop any nuclear bombs, but he's not passive. He's actively confronting injustice and saying, we're all going to become people of contemplative peace. So, Bishop, I've been going around the country and I've been saying things like this and talking about this nonviolent Jesus, and to be Catholic, to be Christian, to be spiritual, to be a human being is to be a person of peace and nonviolence. And I've heard from all these people, well, that's quite interesting what you say there. Personally, I remember one person saying, me personally, I'm a big fan of peace. It's like saying I'm a vegetarian between meals. I'm for peace between wars. That nonviolence is so interesting, but one of my parishioners said, but sometimes, John, you just got to kill somebody. Hitler or Saddam or Osama bin Laden. And if you're a Christian, I say, if that's what you think or that's what you hear, go to what happens next in the story. There he is in the Garden of Gethsemane. Here come the Roman soldiers. What does St. Peter do? He's like, this is my impression. He said, excuse me, Jesus, I'm in charge. My job is to protect our guy, the Holy One. And he's thinking, if there was ever a just war in all of human history, if ever violence was divinely sanctioned, this is the moment. And he's right. His job is to kill, to protect the Holy One. And as he goes to kill the Roman soldiers, to protect the Holy One in justified warfare, just then the commandment comes down, put down your sword. Friends, I think those are the last words of Jesus to the church, to the community before he was killed. It's the last thing he said. And it's the first time they understand the nonviolence of Jesus. Oh my God, Peter's thinking, this guy's so serious about this nonviolence, agape, love your enemies. He's not even going to defend himself with violence, which means we don't get to. And so they're out of there, and they all abandon him. And read Gandhi on the death of Jesus. Gandhi says Jesus goes even deeper into nonviolence. That as he's executed, he forgives his murderers and says, that's it. The killing is over. You're all forgiven, but from now on, we're people of nonviolence. And God raises him from the dead. He says, peace be with you. Now you walk the road of nonviolence and welcome my gift of Pacem and Terris. Spectacular story. And that's my journey with all of you, is trying to be peacemakers, people who love our enemies, people of nonviolence in a world of total violence and war. I take great consolation in thinking about all the movements, all the good people on the planet, the Spirit of God, which is the spirit of nonviolence and peace, at work on the planet right now, beating swords into plowshares, feeding the hungry, housing the homeless, just transforming the whole planet, and we don't see it and we don't hear about it in the media, but it's happening because people are moving. 2/3 of the human race is involved in grassroots peace and justice movement right now. It's a very exciting time. Dr. King said that night before he was killed, this is the most hopeful, exciting moment to be alive, because we are going to be the people who finally embrace the nonviolence of Jesus and lead humanity back from the brink of non-existence. And I think one of the casualties of a culture of total violence and war that we're living in right now is the loss of the imagination. People don't even know what you're talking about if you go down the streets of New York City and ask them about Pacem and Terris. Can you imagine a world without war? And people think you're crazy. But look at the abolitionists. They stood up 200 years ago and they said, excuse me, we are announcing the abolition of slavery. Fantastic. And everyone said, what are you, crazy? You can end slavery? There's always been slavery. There's always been slavery. Some people are not people. It's even in the Bible. And they said, no, a new world is coming, a new world of equality. And they lifted up the vision, reclaimed the imagination of our common unity, and gave their lives for it. Friends, with these great heroes, we are their heirs. They are our ancestors. We are part of that lineage. Only for the rest of our lives, we are going to stand up, as you all are doing, and announce, excuse me, we are announcing the abolition of war itself, and poverty, and starvation, and executions, and racism, and sexism, and nuclear weapons, and global warming. And I've been doing this every day for 30 years, and people say, well, you're just plain nuts. And I say, no, that's our future. A new world of nonviolence is coming. The reign of God is at hand. So exciting to be part of this movement for the disarmament of our hearts and the planet. And you're all doing that, and I thank you so much for the support and encouragement you give me. And I just say, don't be discouraged. Don't give up. Don't be afraid. Don't be silent. Don't despair. This is the greatest thing we can do with our lives, and I'm all with you in becoming Pacem and Terris people, fulfilling our vocations to be peacemakers, the daughters and sons of the God of peace. Just fantastic. So thank you so much for this award, and God bless you, and see you. Thank you. Thanks very much. You're very sweet.
John, we want to thank you, but we also want to conclude with a prayer thanking God for John's commitment and energy for peacemaking, and also that of each one of us gathered here in our commitment. And for this prayer, I'm going to borrow from the words of Walter Brueggemann, biblical scholar, who wrote on the occasion of the bombing of Serbia in March of 1999. Sadly, now their plowshares are beat into swords, as are ours. Now their pruning hooks are beat into spears, as are ours. Not only swords and spears, but bullets and bombs and missiles of steel on flesh, of power against bodies. And you, in your indignation, sound your mantra, "Blessed are the peacemakers." We dare to believe they are the aggressors and we are the peacemakers. Yet in sober night dream we glance otherwise and think we may be aggressor as we vision rubbled homes, murdered civilians, charred children. And you, in our sadness, sound your mantra, "Blessed are the peacemakers." We do not love war. We yearn for peace, but we have lost much will for peace, even while we dream of it. And you, in your hope in us, sound your mantra, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Deliver us from excessive certitude about ourselves. Hold us in the deep ambiguity where we find ourselves. Show us yet again in the gaping space between your will and our feeble imagination. Sound your mantra with more authority, with more indignation, through sadness, in hope. Blessed are the peacemakers. We find ourselves well short of blessed. So give us freedom for your deep otherwise, to be blessed in the name of the peacemaker who gave and did not take away. Amen.